Everything the light touches is our kingdom.
Wow.
A king's time as ruler rises and falls like the sun. One day, Simba, the sun will set on my time here.
Look at this trove, treasures untold. How many wonders can one cavern hold?
There must be more than this provincial life.
This shot has been lodged in my mind since the very first time I watched Beauty and the Beast on VHS sometime in the late 2000s. And there's a lot which makes this shot memorable. Paige O'Hare's vocal performance as Belle is one of the most earnest and believable in the entire Disney catalogue, and the autumn palette is gorgeous to look at. But the thing I want to talk about is the camera work in this scene, or rather what it's imitating, because the technique actually used in this shot and the end result are completely different. If you have a bit of film knowledge, you might recognise it as an arc shot, where the camera orbits around its subject. But why go to such lengths to make this shot look the way it does? And how did they even manage it? Let's dive in. Part 1. Semiotics. There are certain ideas that we intrinsically understand due to prolonged exposure and shared cultural knowledge. It's why people stop at red lights, and why we understand what someone means when they shrug or roll their eyes. This is all part of semiotics, the study of signs and their meanings. In this case, it extends to the medium of film. It's where we get the language of cinematography, the art and techniques of film photography. Like any language, it wasn't invented by a singular person, it's developed over time thanks to the combined efforts of thousands of creatives. And along the way, it's created meaning through association. This association is why we feel off-kilter with a Dutch angle, uneasy with a split diopter, and romantic with a soft focus. The general rule of cinematography is that the camera represents the emotions of the protagonist. Essentially, if a character is really small in the frame, they feel isolated and alone. If the camera is zoomed right into their face, they're uncomfortable and overwhelmed. Cinematography is all about visual metaphors, so if the director has done their job properly, you should be able to understand the emotional context of a film just by looking at the shots. By this same rule, when the camera itself is moved, it usually means there's some kind of paradigm shift. Their perspective is changing.
The camera moved around him because he's changing his perspective on her. Did you get that?
This brings us, quite conveniently, to the arc shot. You've seen it in Marvel movies as the hero shot, but there's a lot more nuance to it than that. An arc shot can help maintain the momentum of a scene, like the tension in an action sequence, or even something not expressly visual, like a thought process. With this in mind, it's easier to understand why a 2D film would feign camera movements. Directors say to leave the audience asking questions, but they mean within the story. General audiences will never question how a 2D film can have a camera moving in 3D space, because all cinema, live action and animated, exists just outside of reality. It's suspension of disbelief, which is not questioning fiction to better enjoy it. This justifies talking teapots and enchanted castles, but arguably the most important part in all of cinema that suspension of disbelief justifies is the existence of the camera. Now we understand why live-action cinematography is used, we can get to the how. In case you haven't seen this film multiple times per day for the past 3 months, I'll explain the context. Belle is an adventurous, intelligent, bookish young woman who feels isolated in the small town she and her father live in. The opening song, suitably titled Belle, introduces the town, the villagers, but most importantly explores her desire to leave. As we covered earlier, this shot keeps up the momentum of the sequence and acts as a payoff for the previous scene where Belle weaves through the bustling streets. We can read the progression of this shot and understand it without actually hearing her sing. Belle begins framed by the town, surrounded by people working. As the shot continues, more and more of the sky becomes visible, and even the crowd is left behind as she looks longingly into a future where she is anywhere else. So, how do we get from here to here? By mapping this shot, we can recreate the original gouache background. You'll immediately notice how long it is. I know I've been harping on about arc shots, but the actual practical shot here is a horizontal pan, and that's characterised by these extended backgrounds. In traditional 2D, the background would scroll a couple of centimetres each frame, which created an effect similar to a live-action truck shot, and that's what gives this shot its flow. Another takeaway is the perspective. It's not completely defined. Usually a shot like this will have a background on 5-point perspective, which is characterised by its spherical appearance, but not here. If I add perspective lines, you can see that they don't really join in one place. Though there's certainly some crookedness to enhance the rural French architecture, this isn't the full reason. In order to create the desired shot, the backgrounds can be heavily warped and distorted. Just take a look at this recreated vertical pan. The areas of the castle furthest from the camera are wildly distorted compared to the gate. They're actually in entirely different perspectives, but it works when the camera is moving and ultimately makes the scene that much more intimidating for the viewer. It's this kind of detail that gives painted backgrounds an edge over 3D. The rules of perspective can simply be bent much further. Now, unlike a couple of sequences in this film, this shot uses a single layer background. This means that it was made more like a painting, unlike this shot, which has each of the elements of the background separated onto individual glass panels. There's a couple of things which the artist did here that add a little of that lost depth. The buildings closer to the camera have more texture and detail, and feel a little sharper when compared to the houses further away. There are areas of the painting that are less detailed, almost blurry, imitating a camera losing focus with more distant objects. These background houses even have a more bluish tint, emulating the real-life effect of Rayleigh scattering. An understated aspect of animation is using reference. It should really be considered part of the standard pipeline, and some companies will shoot their entire movies in live action before animating. Using reference doesn't mean that the shot will come out identically, as you can see when we look at these shots side to side. There's still a lot of room for artistic license, it's just more grounded in the rules of perspective now. Belle is actually the least important part of this entire shot, despite being its main focus. Don't get me wrong, the character animation is beautiful and it takes an enormous amount of time to develop the skill required to pull off such a smooth turn. But aside from the foreshortening with the hands, it's actually just a turn. A very complex and intricate turn, but a turn nonetheless. There is one thing I'd like to point out in it though. During the progression of the turn, she moves deeper into the frame, closer to the camera. If you watch carefully, you can even see where she's shifting her weight, and all of this subtly adds more dimension and texture to the scene. Now what I believe to be the most important part of the shot, the pole. It may seem ridiculous that I view this as more relevant than the protagonist herself, but hopefully you'll understand why in a moment. The pole grounds the shot in a very specific location. From it, we can clearly understand the dimensions of the scene and where specifically she is in town. As I mentioned earlier, many of the rules of cinematography come from the rules of photography, and foreground elements add depth. There's a pretty specific aspect of creating depth in animation that I've intentionally left out until now. It's called parallax, the illusion that objects seem to move when they're seen from different sight lines. Parallax is in play in this scene with the foreground, and it's all in the timing. If we time the foreground and the background from when they start moving to when they stop, we can see that the pole is moving for a far shorter amount of time. This difference in speed helps to create that three-dimensionality, as stationary objects further away will appear to move slower than objects closer to the viewer. The reason that this shot looks so fluid is that its most important elements, the background, Belle and the pole, are animated on ones, compared to the rest of the film, which is mostly animated on twos. This means that there's a new drawing on every frame instead of every other frame. While working on twos is the standard and still allows for smooth movement, scenes like this one benefit from the precision that animating on ones allows. Watch these two versions of the shot side by side and see what you think. Now, none of this is to say that animating a character on twos for a more complex shot shouldn't be done. This shot from Anastasia is quite similar in its technical requirements, yet if we slow the footage, we can see that the central characters of this scene move on twos while the background moves on ones. A general rule is that as long as the background is moving on ones, the illusion will still hold up. Removing even one of these elements that make up the scene would completely ruin the illusion. Each of these elements individually cannot fully support the arc shot, but combined, and it's breathtaking. There is no reason to put less thought into 2D cinematography just because the camera interacts with its world a little differently. The next time you're animating, consider how the framing of your shot influences your narrative. Take cues from live-action filmmakers, learn the shots, and try and implement them in your work using distorted backgrounds and reference footage and foreground elements. With the rise of 3D, 2D combined media and the constant advancements in animation, difficult shots can be assisted with 3D backgrounds. Even within Beauty and the Beast, Disney experimented with CGI backgrounds and in doing so created one of the most famous animated sequences of all time. For the 2012 3D release, animators added that extra dimension not by completely reanimating scenes, but with depth maps, a technique which uses grayscale to show the relative distance from the camera, where the nearer the object, the lighter the colour. Software like Adobe After Effects are able to recreate the multiplane camera by mapping 2D images in 3D planes. Real cameras have even been used in animated projects, like the unironically revolutionary work of Surf's Up, which motion captured a camera to achieve the handheld look of their mockumentary. But understanding how these visuals were achieved before the rise of 3D shows us lower-tech workarounds, helps us further innovate animation technology, gives younger animators a laundry list to follow, and allows us to appreciate the artistry behind each and every scene.